So next up, we're going to be talking about AI sustainability paradox, the sort of two sides of AI when it comes to sustainability. The paradox or tension being that AI is obviously demonstrating a huge amount of potential to address a lot of our environmental and sustainability challenges, but it's also proving to demand just an outrageous amount of energy and water as well, which we'll get into to train these models and to run those models. And so that's leading to concerns about how we meet some of those energy demands, and certainly concerns around what emissions or environmental impact AI is going to have as we scale it up. So how do those forces balance out? And at a practical level, how should businesses think about navigating some of those issues around AI and sustainability, capturing the benefits of AI for their sustainability goals, but making sure they're not going to be undermining them at the same time through AI use? I'm very pleased to be joined by Takiri Wandaragala, Senior EMEA Consultant at Lenovo, who knows a thing or two about AI infrastructure and is really at the front lines of helping organizations think through these issues. Takiri, welcome. Very pleased to be discussing with you.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
So there's a sort of big picture here around AI use and the sort of costs and benefits, and then there's the sort of more micro level at an individual basis for companies about how they're thinking about it. Maybe we can start wide and then narrow in, if that's okay. Just from your perspective, working with organizations, working with digital infrastructure, just how power hungry is AI compared to normal computing workloads? How big a deal is this?
Okay, so this power story, and I've been in the industry a while, and it's been simmering, right? We've seen this and we've known this problem for a long, long time, okay? But what AI has done is put it on steroids, okay? So we saw this coming, but then suddenly, and to give you some sort of idea, you're talking about just, if you're comparing, let's say, CPUs versus these accelerator technologies, you're talking about 3 times to 5 times, okay? Some cases 10 times. So it is quite amazing how much, you have to consider now. So this is really causing people to think very differently about how they structure their infrastructure. In the past, infrastructure was very boring, no one paid any attention. But suddenly in the last 24 to 36 months, it's of huge interest to everybody because the electricity bills. Simple as that. And then the CO2 aspects associated with it.
And where do you see it heading at the moment? Because it seems to be there's a lot of uncertainty there around these models, both around how much energy is used by the models and how that's changing. And then at the deployment as well, we're seeing more of a shift from the energy used to train the models through to sort of inference and reasoning, etc. How do you expect it to progress just on that side of things in terms of demand?
You're absolutely right there. This is a very fast-moving world, right? So the models, you're getting more efficient systems, coming in. But you're right about the model development versus the inference, Mm-hmm. And that is a big difference, right? Because in one case, you're looking at data centers. In another case, a lot of people are looking at inference at the edge, okay? Now, this is really interesting because what this does, inference will use a lot more compute, a lot more compute. But if you do it at the edge, it changes the power density, the energy density requirements, okay? So that is going to be a shift that we're going to see. Another interesting thing, I always look at other things that have happened in the past and sort of map it through because, history sort of repeats itself. And I remember the Genome Project many years ago where initially it took a lot of time, a lot of compute power, okay? But as people started understanding the models there, it collapsed. Now what some took years and amazing amounts of compute power can now be done in a couple of days, okay? And a similar thing will happen here. As the smarts get onto this, I'm very optimistic.
Right. To plan someone.
So, right. Yeah, one of us. Yes.
Because what do you think it is going to mean for emissions? Because we have seen that, Microsoft's emissions up 1/3 in the last 5 years. Google's are up by half in the last 5 years as they built out AI,
Yeah.
because there isn't enough renewable demand to meet this. So it's going to come down to other solutions around efficiencies and so on.
Absolutely.
So how do you see that side of the ledger working out in terms of how far we can go in efficiencies, and whether that is something that applies to data centers globally, not just these big players?
Yeah, so it's interesting you mentioned that. So it depends on the player, right? The bigger players have been focused on this area. They've been looking at this very, very carefully, and so their efficiencies are far higher than you sometimes see as you move down the food chain, yeah? But I see a lot of potential there. So the numbers that are banded around in a classic data center design is there's 40% of your energy is used for cooling, for turning fans around, yeah? Moving air to a chiller, which then has to evaporate and things like that. So that's 40%. So there's a lot of room to play there, okay? The second thing is how you decide to do your work, right? It doesn't all have to be real time. So these models could be done. I'm old-fashioned to remember batch, doing stuff of, doing it at different times, yeah? So in that scenario, you may not, do everything real time, and that changes the model, okay? So I think there's a lot of scope here, but it requires us to think radically and differently from the way we are right now, yeah? Because my take is that we have a very siloed approach, okay? The person who writes the code asks for 8 GPUs. That's the currency. You have to have 8 GPUs. And the person who puts the system in doesn't, he's further down the food chain, or she's further down the food chain. I just have to give this guy 8 GPUs, or girl 8 GPUs. And then that person feeds it back to the data center person, I need this much power. But if everybody's made aware of this, then I think the story starts changing. Right? So that I keep telling users or customers, every byte of data has a dollar associated with it, right? Has a wattage associated with it, and believe it or not, water. Because some data centers are not being difficult to deploy because of restrictions in water for cooling systems, for evaporative cooling. So these are the sort of things that I think are, running in the industry right now. A lot of opportunities.
If you look at data center sort of workloads over the last 9 years,
right.
or last 10 years, or 2010 to 2020, they've increased 9-fold. Right. But energy demand, this sort of electricity demand, has just increased by 10%.
Right.
So it implies a huge amount from efficiency. Do you think that can continue?
That's a really good one, because that data comes from the International Energy Agency. Yeah, that data. That happened because people were using hyperscale cloud systems, and they were far more efficient. So you had that benefit, because those providers are very concerned that they view their data center as their business, and any 5%, 10%, they go for it. Okay, so going forward, we've eaten up a lot of that benefit there, okay? So going forward, we'll have to think slightly differently. And also, customers are, talking more about hybrid AI, right? Just like hybrid cloud, okay? So bringing stuff in-house, right? So will they be working to the same level of efficiency as a big hyperscaler? These are the sort of things that I think has to be taken into consideration, okay?
We've got 5 minutes left now to talk about how AI can resolve the climate crisis.
Right.
So how does it, what is the other side about how AI can start addressing sustainability? Because the view of Eric Schmidt, Bill Gates, and is don't worry about the emissions. It's just going to be a drop in the ocean compared to the benefits we could get. Is that plausible?
Again, which side you sit on here? The optimist like myself, yeah. At Lenovo, for our customers, because there's this one issue. One is the energy consumption, but the other aspect of sustainability is looking at entire supply chains. Yeah, because when you're looking at scope 3, it's not just your operation, it's your suppliers and your customers, etc. Right? There's a lot of data that needs work on, right? A lot of efficiencies that are possible. And here we're using tooling to help customers, right? AI modeling to basically look at and give guidance on what can be done. And it could be simple things like packaging. It's very simple things can impact this. So I see using AI as, just like, in other industries, whereby you're getting, information about large data sets, being able to pull out patterns, models, etc., that might have benefits. I can see this, and we're actually doing this with customers, in forms of tooling and workshops and services, etc., related to this.
And I've seen, for instance, a study where they were using machine learning, or it's a concept of using machine learning to cut aviation contrails, right?
Yes.
And they say that just doing that alone, if you applied it globally, would be enough to outweigh the contribution of the entire US data centers. So those kinds of contributions can be actually sort of quite extraordinary.
Absolutely. And what's interesting, I come from an infrastructure background and everything. A lot of the energy efficiencies problems, we know how to do it. We've already done it in HPC and other markets, right? It's a matter of bringing some of those ideas across, and they're not, it's like water cooling. We've done this for years and years and years. In fact, before air cooling, what was there was water cooling. The big old mainframes, yeah? And it's basically trying to relearn some of that stuff, right? So for me, the frustration is a lot of the solutions are actually out there. Right?
And what's stopping them scaling out more globally? Are the businesses caring about this? Is this a more expensive approach to get those other efficiencies in energy use?
It's an interesting one, because I was actually doing a presentation, and my son looked at my charts, and he said, I showed this, and these were from 20 years ago. And the story here was the things are the cycles. You don't change data centers like this. You don't bring on a nuclear power station like this. It does take time. There are different cycles. So we hear changes in AI, every day there's something new, right? So there is these time scales. The other one I do think is the silos, the awareness that we think in our own little box. Okay, I'm doing my containerization, programming, and I don't look at the other thing. All the companies that are running these systems efficiently break down these silos, right? And I think with AI, that's one of the big stories here, with the access to data from all different sources, yeah?
Great.
Okay.
1 minute. What practical advice would you give to organizations who are trying to navigate these twin impacts of AI?
Number one is awareness, right? And getting accurate data. The number of times, do you have accurate data about how your infrastructure is operating, how your workloads are running? That's number one. Whether it's in the cloud or whether it's on-prem or wherever, right? This sort of stuff has been, it's boring, it's systems management, but this is very insightful. This gives you these little secret pieces of information that can change your business. Next thing is breaking down the silos, right? The other aspect is efficiencies. There's a lot of room. I tell customers, even if let's say you don't care about the cost of energy, okay? It's free for you. Let's say you don't care about CO2, okay? Should I still be thinking about this story? Absolutely. Why? Because these new processes, guess what? If you overheat them, they slow down. There's no point buying all this fancy stuff, because they'll clock themselves down. So even in the coldest climates, you have to think about this. So you've got to think about the infrastructure, right? So for me, absolutely worth doing, right? And it's, as I said, if you forget the money, forget the CO2. If you want the performance, right, you're going to have to do something about this. Okay.
Fantastic. All right, Thierry.
Thank you very much.
Ongoing challenge, but an ongoing opportunity.
Absolutely.
As well. Okay, thank you very much for your time and insight.